Hello everybody. We're going to do a bell talk episode today. This one's going to be a little bit more for the raised letter fans, and then somebody finds something interesting, let me know. So today what we're going to talk about is the differences between the very first run of raised letter bells, and then how that differs from the second run, and then so forth. We're just basically going to be comparing first run and second run, since there's not a lot of difference from second run to current bells. But we will talk about a little bit of differences. You can see here we have bells 1, 2, 3A, 4A, and 5. So a simple K5LA bell setup, and we'll just kind of run through each set of bells, and talk about some of the differences. So we'll start with the ones. I'll give you guys just a little overview of everything really quick, camera-wise, and then we'll start to look at things a little bit closer and talk about stuff. So we'll just kind of do a little pan over here of everything nice and slow, so that way everyone can kind of see some differences overall between the bells there. So we'll kind of move some of this stuff out of the way here, and we'll just go in order. We'll start with our 1 bells and work down. And then when we get to 2 bells, we'll talk a little bit further on those. Even though I've already done a bell talk episode on the 2s, we'll kind of go more into just some RL stuff here. So here we have a first run raised letter 1 bell, and then a second run raised letter 1 bell. I do not have a third run available right now, so we're just gonna talk about some differences between these. So with the first run, you can see we started to have beveling on both sides of the nozzle. The bells prior to this, the non-raised letter bells, would have just had the bevel on the inside, and then that outside corner would have been a straight edge. So you're starting to see what you see more modern. The newer RL ones do not have a inner bevel anymore. I believe they still have an outer bevel, but they do not. They're more of a straight cut down to the bore of the nozzle. So that's one difference. On this, we do not have any beveling or any curved machining into the throat of the bell, so this is a lot like pre-raised letter bell stuff right here. Other than the nozzle and that, not really too much else to talk about. Power chambers didn't really change. Manufacturing processes did change. You can see there's this straight cut lining on here, kind of like on a lathe. And then even on the second run, kind of hard to see. There you go. You can see the straight line cutting like a lathe would do. Anything after second run would have the CNC look to it. It would actually be a cutting bit, and you could see every little circular cut line as the bit worked its way around. Same thing with the nozzle would be the same way. And then some of the differences here. So if we look at the 2, you can see second run we start to have a beveled cut into the throat of the bell. Still have the beveled edges on both sides of the nozzle, so this is before we started to get that straight line cut on the inside of the bore. Like I said, old machining. The machining between these 2 is pretty much exactly the same. Really, the only difference between these 2 is that we started to have a beveled cut into the throat of the bell. Other than that, there's not a lot of difference. This first run, so this would have been right after they produced the early K5HLs and early K5LLAs. So this probably would have been 2007, and then this would have been, I think these carried into 2008 through 2009, and probably later than that. I'm not exactly sure when they started to do the straight lined milling on the nozzle on these. But yeah, so this is, like I said, we're just kind of talking first run, second run. Other than that, I'm not really going to talk about the appearance of the bell. It's all raised letter stuff, pretty standard stuff. Nothing changed with the size of the inlets anymore. So not a whole lot of difference. There's no the depth of the bore does not change between these two. So yeah, not a lot of change there. But yeah, these first runs are probably around 2007, if I had to take a guess. Early 50K would probably be around that time frame, somewhere around there. So there's the one bells, so we'll just kind of keep on moving on here. So now we'll go to the twos. So we'll start with the first run RL2. So you guys can see that the nozzle resembles its earlier sister. So these nozzles look exactly like the nozzles on the pre-raised letter LLAs and the K5HLs. It's a very thick nozzle, no outer bevel, just the inner bevel. Also resembles a lot of the late 20s to all through the 30K of non-raised letter 2s. Just a very simple nozzle. Inside bevel only. Not, nowhere near a deep bore yet. This is well before the deep bore 2s came out. Like I said, all these are probably around 2007 in age. On the second run of RL2s, we finally started to see the outer bevel. I don't understand why they did outer bevel on first run 1s and didn't start to do that on the 2s until the second run. I find that kind of interesting. Once again, we have a beveled cut into the throat of the bell. This, if I didn't show you the side of the bell that it's a raised letter, and you just looked at that, you'd swear it's a non-raised letter bell, with how old school that looks. But yeah, so two differences you see between the first run and second run: the nozzle and the beveling. And then come over here, and just for the comparisons, we have a third run deep bore 2. This came off of a 60 something K K3 LA. So puts it around 2009, which is a lot earlier than what you would think they would have started to do the deep bore 2s. And even before I started really looking at this stuff, I didn't pay much attention. And I always thought the deep bore 2s came around 2010 or 2012, somewhere around there, but they actually came in pretty early on. So just for a full-on comparisons here, we have the first run, no outside bevel, no inner bevel on the throat. Then the second run, which has the bevel from the throat to from the nozzle to the throat, and then we have the outside bevel. And then third run, which is pretty much current. The only thing that has changed on these bells from anything newer is the machining. And I'll see, So other than my fingerprints on there, you can see some straight lined millwork there, like on a lathe. Anything later than this, they started to use more CNC type cutting methods for this. The bore is CNC. You can see all the little cut lines, all the little ridges right there from where the bit was, from where the bit was spinning around and milling all that stuff away. And then we also have the curved cut into the throat. It's no longer just a hardline bevel cut, it's a gentle curve cut, machined cut into the throat. And then of course the bore depth changed there. And then we have that, since the bore depth changed and they're actually doing millwork in here, we have a straight line cut on the outside and a beveled edge, or straight line cut on the inside, beveled edge on the outside. Same exact as the ones, the newer ones. They actually have a machined down nozzle, which isn't much deeper than these. I don't even know if it is deeper at all. I don't think it is. But they just started machining it instead of casting it like on these guys. So there's some changes there. So that's kind of the scope of how the raised letter 2s have evolved over time. And like I said, I have a earlier Bell Talk, I think it's my first Bell Talk episode, is all about 2, so I kind of talk about some of that stuff, but we're just kind of going back and retouching on some of that. So we'll set those aside. And we'll move on to the 3 bells. The 3As, I mean. So, same thing with the 2s on these. The 3A and the 4A, if I did not show you that it was actually a raised letter bell, if you were to just look at the nozzles, they resemble pre-raised letter bells. Very flat, no beveling on these, which is the same as on the non-raised letter 3As and non-raised letter 4As. No beveling on the inside or outside, just some minor, very minor beveling just from the machining process of milling down the bore for the 3A. The milling processes looks older. If you compare these to late 20s and all through the 30Ks of 3As, the machining is very similar. It's very large, big cuts. You can see where the bit stopped there. See if I can see outside. You can see it's still that straight line cut like on a lathe. No curving or beveling from the bore into the throat of the bell, just a straight line cut. And then we compare that to the second run. Now the second run, 3As actually started to have this soft curve machine cut into the throat of the bell, unlike the 2s that just had this very kind of sharp beveled edge. They didn't start doing the curvature till the deeper bores were being produced. Machining process is still the same. It's got that straight lined lathe cut to it. The machining is definitely cleaner and more uniform inside of the bore itself. Here you can see a lot of the cut lines and everything. Here you can see a little bit of the machining where the bit came in, but other than that, you don't really see a lot of, if this would focus, you don't really see too much of that really big, the bigger gouging that you see some of these, where some of these ridges are actually pretty rough, and you can really see where that bit was cutting in. So a lot of the machining process has been smoothed out on that. And then we also have the introduction of the outer bevel. Still no inner bevel because, you know, they're machining all the way down, so it's a flat cut on the inside. And then that outer beveled edge starts to come along on the 3As. So there's the differences. They're pretty clear between the transition from the bore into the throat and then the outer bevel compared to this just being a completely flat, for the better part, a straight cut on inside and outside. Definitely an older, still sticking with the pre-raised letter bell techniques here on how they cut and machine their nozzles. So there's your first and second run of those. And we will move on to the Forays. The Forays, we got a few differences here that we'll talk about. So, let's see, the Foray resembles the non-raised letter Forays internally. Straight cuts inside and out on the nozzle ring. Very flat, very wide nozzle ring. Heavy machining cuts on the inside. You can really see them and feel them. No transition from bore to the body of the bell there, the throat. And this is a raised letter Foray, hand stamped. And their stamping was a little different back then too. They pretty much put the stamp right on top of the air chime nowadays, or back when they were still stamping bells, but it was the second and third runs, they were up higher and not right on top of the air chime name. Still have that very straight line lathe cut on the outer rings there. And then you go over to the second run Foray, we start to have that nice machined curved ridge going into the throat of the bell. The actual milling of the bore is much cleaner, much smoother. And then you also see the bevel, the outside bevel, come in. And another difference between these is the bore depth. The bore depth on the first run 4A is ½ an inch. Roughly about ½ an inch from the top of the nozzle down to the bottom of the bore. This is also the exact same bore depth as the 4As that were produced for the first K5 LLAs. The early K5 LLAs had the exact same bore depth. They started to get away from the half-step bore 4As. And then another interesting note with this bore depth, this is also the same bore depth that CSX used on their square tag 4As on their 90s K5 LAs. The square tagged 4As had the same bore depth, so it was deeper than half step, but we're not as deep as second to modern runs. I'm not 100% sure on the bore depth on this. I'm not the best with reading and measuring tape. I'll be the first to admit that. But just so that way you guys can see the difference. And I'll see if I can hold this somewhat level. Maybe. Focus. So you can see we're right at about ½ an inch right there. And then we come over to the second run 4As. Let's see if I can focus. And you can see we're about 2 ticks deeper. Sorry for the shaky cam here. We're about two ticks deeper on the 4As there. So they went from, on their first runs and then even earlier 4As, they went from ½ an inch to boring to that mark right now, and my memory is not working too good today. I can't remember what that measurement exactly is, but that shows you that there is a difference in the bore depths over time. I always thought that once they got to raised letter, it was a deeper bore. I never compared the two. I never paid too much attention, and then one day I was kind of looking at these side by side and noticing that you can visually see that that bore is shallower than that bore. If I hold this level enough, you can actually look at it and see that the second run is deeper. So, and then I compared this to the Foray on my my early, let's see, where is it? It's one of those two, I can't tell which one from here. My early K5 LLA, the exact same bore depth as this. So they started to bore these Forays a little bit deeper, even pre-raised letter. So it's kind of cool that there's, even the fact that there's a difference between this raised letter bell and this raised letter bell, and the bore depth is really cool. There is no bore depth difference between a first run RL3A and a second run RL3A. There's literally no bore depth. I can't remember. I think it's like 7/8 of an inch. If my memory is correct. Let's check it here. Yeah, right about at 7/8 of an inch. And that's for both of these. So they did not change any bore depth from first run to second run, but they did on the Forays. They did sound testing and realized that a little bit deeper sounded a little bit better, a little bit more correct. Even though these ones were, you know, very far from the half-step bore Forays, these ones are even a little bit further. So just kind of really shows you the evolution that they went through with a lot of these bells and a lot of the changes. So that's it for the Forays. And we will go on to the 5s. Now I do not have, I don't have a second run 5, but I have seen a second run 5. This is a, I think it's like a 4th run, 3rd or later run. You can see the CNC machining has started to come into play, so this is a little bit later, but I will kind of explain on the differences here anyway. So the first run 5 bells look pretty normal. You can see they actually did start to bevel the edge, the outer edge on the nozzle ring. There is no beveling or curving from the transition from the bore to the throat of the bell. So that's very much older look there. This one I'm just going to kind of use it as a working example since I don't have a second run 5. Now, interestingly enough, the second run 5s, and they carried through even through the 2 bell. I think they made it through the 3rd run of 5 bells. Actually, they got away from the outer bevel. They actually went back to a completely flat milled nozzle. Of course, this is a later one, so it's kind of has some beveling, and their machining is a little off. So actually, you get to a point here where there's 0 beveling. And then you also start to see a curved cut into the bell, and that's exactly how the second run 5s were. They had no beveling, but then they did have the curved cut into the throat of the bell, the curved transition there. And then another difference that also carried from the that went from the first to the second run and then so forth. The 5 bell bore actually got deeper. And I'll see, second run 5 bell bores are exactly the same depth as any newer runs, so this one is still a good example for that. And my measuring tape doesn't not show it up, so I'm actually gonna just use a a modeling ruler that I have here. It's actually got scale sizes for modeling in a couple different scales. So we'll just kind of do a visual check on the lines. My reading of this ruler is very poor, so I'm just going to kind of show you guys. So we're, just for an eye reference, we're at that line right above that 4. That's right where our cut is, maybe a little bit, maybe a hair deeper, but it's pretty shallow. That's a pretty shallow 5. And then we come over to our newer one, and you can see we're almost to the line before the 8. So that's what the old one is, and then we sink clear down to there for newer 5 bells. And I am sorry that I don't I can't remember those measurements. So yeah, a couple differences. Like I said, I'm just going to use this as a working example. They started to bevel it, and then they stopped beveling for the 2nd and 3rd runs, and then when you get to 4th runs, then they went back to beveling, which this would be a 4th run. You can see the machining is a lot different. You can see the machining on the milling of the bore resembles a lot of the non-raised letter 5s. Bore depth is the same as non-raised letter 5s. The only difference is with this one is the fact that they started to do, I guess you could say they experimented with beveling and then went back to it after a couple runs of 5s. They really, like I said, I wish I had a second run 5 to show you guys, but this one's close enough. The only difference is there's beveling on there. That's pretty much the only difference other than machining differences. And this is a raised letter 5. Air chime both sides. The 5, as a lot of you know, they switched where the numbers used to be over here on the non-raised letter bells, and then they transitioned over there. That's just a little side note on that. But so yeah, guys, that's some of the differences in your very first run of raised letter bells to the 2nd and newer run raised letter bells. And the sounds are much different. These 5s, they still sound like a 5 bell, but there is definitely a difference. Even from this angle, you can see the difference in the bore depth. And then I'm not sure, we can check this here and see if I can get it down low enough. Because I think the throats are even bigger on the newer ones. So there's your reading. Roughly about what the throat is on a new 5. I'll just hold that there for a second, and then we'll check it on this 5 and see if there's much difference. So yeah, we definitely have difference there. So the newer, I'll hold that just so you guys can kind of see for a second. So the throats on the newer 5s are definitely bigger. Nowhere near a big bore 5 would you call this. It's just slightly bigger than the first run of 5s, and then also this throat is exactly the same size as the pre-raised letter 5s too, so nothing changed there. Also, nothing really changed on throat size differences on any of these bells. That's why I didn't really talk about the size difference, because there is none. So yeah, guys, there you go. Kind of an in-depth talk on the differences between the very first run of raised letter bells and then the second run to current. So if you guys found this interesting, let me know. If I left something out, let me know. The only thing I didn't really talk about, or I didn't talk about at all in this episode, is the first run of raised letter 1Ls. I already did a 1L talk episode, so if you guys want to kind of learn about that, go back through my videos, find that. I kind of go in depth from first run raised letter to second run raised letter, and then the two-piece 1Ls. I talk about all that in earlier episodes. So this is just differences from when they very first started producing the raised letter bells to the second run. Some of the differences, how similar the first runs are to their non-raised letter siblings, and then the differences going forward in their machining processes and how they kind of fine-tune the sound of their horns. So, hope everyone enjoyed. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and until next time, take care, everybody.